They like to pretend we're the villains. Welcome to the Gentleman's Guide to the Traditions. Yes, that's what they like to pretend. That's the story that they like to tell. The Syndicate are profiteers, the New World Order are relentless tyrants, Iteration X, soulless machines, and the Progenitors, maybe the worst of all, because they hide their villainy within lab coats while offering medicine, health, improvement. Well, in the background, they're vivisecting humanity in the name of progress. It's a clean narrative, it's easy to digest, completely inadequate. I've done business with them for 30 years. I've never been vivisected. If you want to understand the progenitors, you have to abandon the fairy tale and look at the ledger. History, incentives, outcomes. They are older than our current branding, older even than the Union itself in its modern form. Before progenitors became a term whispered by some with awe, others with revulsion, they were something softer, almost acceptable. The Cosian Circle, the Hippocratic Circle, names that invoked healing, balance, responsibility, and they meant it, at least back then. The Cosian Circle predates our modern paradigms of medicine. There's no point trying to relate the way they practiced then to how the progenitors act now. There are very few similarities, but so that you have some foundation, so that you have the key features, it's best that I explain. You see, they were anatomists, they were herbalists, they were empiricists, I suppose, in an early form, men and women trying to systematize the body when most of the world still thought disease was the result of curses and temperament imbalances. Their power came from observation and repetition, not revelation. Even then, they were edging toward enlightened science, whether they called it that or not. They were still foremost practitioners of the sphere we refer to as life. It's just that the sleepers, the unawakened, the ignorant masses, they didn't see what they were doing as science, of course. They just saw it as magic. You could therefore perhaps assume the Cosian Circle had more in common with the traditions of today than they do with our friends. Now, the Hippocratic Circle, which came later, was more disciplined, more codified. Oaths mattered. Ethics mattered. Do no harm wasn't just branding, but I have to say that as far as brands go, it's one that has really stood the test of time. If I had been able to put some money behind that brand, do no harm, good Lord, imagine how much I would have now. It was a boundary condition, do no harm. Their magic, yes, I'll use that word. It was rooted in understanding that the body as a system was to be corrected, not supplicated over, not feared, not worshipped. But here's the part the traditions never emphasize. Both circles were constantly under siege. You see, the Verbena witches, they accused them of arrogance. Choristers questioned their lack of faith. Early alchemists, proto-hermetics, resented their dismissal of spiritual correspondence. When plague swept through Europe, it wasn't the witches or the miracle workers who scaled solutions. It was the circle. Quarantines, surgical interventions. They were crude, yes, but effective. And effectiveness is a dangerous drug. Effectiveness is what convinces you to keep doubling down. It changes you. And that transformation came with the Asclepian order. They were a philosophical pivot for these would-be progenitors. Subtle at first, then absolute. They stopped asking, how do we heal, and began asking, why does illness exist at all? Do you see the difference? The first question accepts a flawed world and seeks to mend it. The second assumes the flaw is, well, unacceptable. This is where the Order began its quiet divorces from mysticism, from spirituality, from the idea that life and death were anything but processes to be optimized. They refined surgical techniques, standardized medical education, and began cataloging human variation with a zeal that would make any syndicate auditor proud. They also began to experiment. Dissections turned into live studies. Yes, I have to admit that even I was slightly put off. Herbal remedies became chemical interventions. Selective breeding of plants at first, then animals, then less publicly discussed subjects. This is where you start to see fractures with the traditions, and they persist to this day. The Verbena especially never forgave them. To a Verbena, life is sacred because it is cyclical, mysterious, and fundamentally wild. To an Asclepian, life was becoming a dataset, and datasets, they can be improved. I could even provide you with the next iteration myself. When the technocratic union formalized, the Asclepian Order didn't resist the rebrand. They embraced it. Progenitors was their new name, and it was a name with intent. It doesn't just describe what they do. It defines their ambition. They're not healers anymore. They're not creators. They are originators. They know the beginning. And likely, as they consider themselves Alpha, they will also consider themselves Omega. If there is ever to be an end, the progenitors believe it is up to them to set that agenda. Now, we may disagree with them there, but still, it's a fine ambition. And you don't get anywhere in this life without ambition. By the mid-20th century, they had embedded themselves in every meaningful vector of biological advancement: pharmaceuticals, genetics, epidemiology, public health infrastructure. If you think your local hospital operates independently of them, you are adorable. From my side of the union, the value proposition was clear. They extend human lifespan. They increase productivity. They reduce systemic risk from disease and biological catastrophe. And increasingly, they create new markets. Entirely new markets. You didn't think we would notice that last one? Right now, the progenitors are everywhere you would expect, and several places you wouldn't. They dominate biotech startups before those startups even really know they exist. They seed research grants through layers of shell foundations, and they quietly steer regulatory bodies to approve what they've decided will succeed. That's just the surface layer, the consensus-facing operation. Underneath, that's where things get interesting. They are deep into genome editing, not just correcting disease markers, but optimizing traits, intelligence, resilience, emotional regulation. Going back to that original for humans belief that they possessed. You won't see the results in public datasets yet, but you will see them in certain exceptional individuals who seem just a little too well calibrated for modern life. Those perpetual social media whores, influencers, political leaders of the populist variety. Oh, a lot of individuals seem to think that progenitors are all wearing white lab coats and performing surgeries in brightly lit rooms. Yes, some of them are, that's most definitely the case. But don't be mistaken for thinking that that is all the progenitors are and can be. They're exploring synthetic biology, is my understanding. Organisms designed from scratch. It's quite an innovative pursuit. Not modified, designed. Entire ecological niches could be rewritten in a generation if they push this far enough. And then there's their oldest obsession, death. Oh, they would deny it. They would say that it is life that drives them. But deep within the progenitors is this persistent fear of death, of entropy, of annihilation. What happens when the meteor hits? What happens when the ice caps melt? What happens when? What good will all their medicine be when the nukes start flying? You see, they're obsessed with death, and in its way, immortality. Not in the vulgar sense. They're not chasing vampire myths or hermetic ascension. They're working continuity, preservation of consciousness, transfer of identity, interruption of decay processes. Cryonics is a toy. They are building something far more elegant. If they succeed, end of life, well, becomes a negotiable term, and negotiation is the kind of thing where I excel. You don't usually meet progenitors in those fabled lab coats. They can look like anybody. Hell, the most recent progenitors I encountered were like scruffy tech bros, wearing shades at night, tattered outfits to belie their crypto wealth. As an ally, a progenitor is invaluable. Need a custom-designed antiviral agent for a pathogen that shouldn't exist? They will have 3 prototypes before lunchtime. Need to keep a high-value asset alive after catastrophic injury? They'll rewrite the rules of viability. You only have their skull, their brain, and the top half of their spine. That person has a chance. But they always seek something in return. Data, access, permission to observe, and participation. They're very eager participants. I once facilitated a deal where a progenitor saved a syndicate executive from a degenerative neural condition. In exchange, they embedded a suite of experimental monitoring systems in his body. He lived. He thrived, even. He also stopped being the person he was before this transformation, and is now doing an awful lot to help progenitor interests. This does raise the issue where sometimes progenitors are rivals. They don't think in quarters or fiscal years, they think in generations. You might win a negotiation, only to realize 10 years later they were maneuvered into funding their long-term objective. They're particularly dangerous when their goals intersect with ours. Pharmaceutical monopolies, healthcare infrastructure, insurance models. They don't just want profit streams. They want control over the definition of health itself. And if you control that, you control everything. As an enemy? Thankfully, I've never been an enemy to the progenitors. They're my friends, my business associates, my investors. But if you are their enemy, pray that they find something bigger and badder to focus on soon, because a hostile progenitor won't send an assassin. They'll send a condition, something subtle, something deniable, an autoimmune cascade, a prion misfold, a tailored virus that only expresses under specific environmental triggers. Or they'll do something even worse, and that's decide that you are useful to them. There are rumours, and they're credible, of individuals captured and repurposed as living research platforms. Conscious, aware, studied over years, decades even. The sort of horror the traditions love to dramatize, except occasionally, obviously. Obviously, just occasionally, it's true. If you're looking for conflict, and there's always conflict, and conflict makes money, the progenitors are a nexus of it. The Verbena remain their most visceral enemies. Any progenitor project involving reproductive control, gene editing, or ecological restructuring is likely to draw their attention. There are entire rural regions where the two groups engage in a quiet war over what natural means. The cult of ecstasy, meanwhile, occasionally intersects with them in unexpected ways. Neurological research, altered states, designer, neurochemistry. Imagine a progenitor lab trying to quantify enlightenment, and a cultist trying to break their instruments. The virtual adepts, well, all of us in the technocracy would say this, they're increasingly relevant. We hate it, but they are. Consciousness transfer, neural mapping, digital substratas for identity. This is where biotech meets information theory. Joint projects do happen. So do spectacular betrayals just at the moment of understanding. The euthanatoi, They go by different names now. If you want philosophical fireworks, put a progenitor who believes death is a solvable problem in a room with someone who believes death is necessary, then step back. I'm willing to place bets on who comes out on top, but I'm not sharing them with you. From a syndicate perspective, the progenitors are both an asset and a liability. I hate to admit it, but all investments carry with them a certain modicum of risk. They expand the boundaries of what's possible with creating new markets, as I've already mentioned, new revenue streams, new forms of control, but they also have a tendency to ignore cost in the traditional sense. Ethical, financial, even existential. They'll spend anything to achieve a breakthrough. They're not evil. Evil is far too simple a term, and we should, I would say, refrain from referring to any tradition, order, or the like as evil. Reserve that for the Nafandi, shall we? They're committed, how about that, to a vision of humanity that is healthier, longer lived, and whether they admit it or not, better designed. The question isn't whether they'll succeed in that vision, they already have. The question is whether when they're done they will recognize their product as complete, or whether they will keep working, keep tinkering. And you know what they say. The person who is uncertain about his investments will eventually collapse them all, because he'll just keep playing and playing and playing until he will start making losses, and by then it will be too late to stop the erosion. Maybe the progenitors will adapt. Maybe they'll become the worst of us all. I suppose we'll just have to wait and see, and, as I say, place your bets. I already have.